Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. I'm Emcee Frodis. I've mentioned how I've been a member of the Sherlock fandom for a long time. My particular area of fandom was writing stories about Sherlock and Molly Hooper, also known as Sherlolly. The Sherlollians today are doing something called self-interviews, where people can talk about their writing processes. So I've decided to do that for two of my stories, The Full House and Always Something. Just to keep things neat, I'll do the writing process stuff first, since that applies to both, and then I'll tackle each story individually. Did you use a beta, and if so, how did that go? Do you wish you had used a beta if you didn't? I did use a beta. Up until her death, my mother betaed all of my writing. Most of my fanfic thanks Pablo in the author's notes, and that was my mom. She was a fan of Sherlock as well, and she was a really great writer. She helped me out on a lot of things, and I really wish she could read my stuff now. Partway through The Full House, I also picked up a second beta reader, Lexi, also known as This Is Art by Lexi. She was a fan of my story, and we became really fast friends, so she started to read my stuff, and she read everything through Always Something. I love having beta readers. I think that it makes me feel more confident about posting my work, because I know that there's at least one person out there who really likes it. Where do you write? What kind of setting? So I either sit on my bed or I sit at my desk. Definitely my bedroom. I've created a nice little womb for myself. It's really not all that exciting. Anything specific to your writing process that you always have to do? Probably second guess everything I do and ask my mom and Lex to reassure me that what I'm doing is good, because I'm a fragile artist and I need to be told I'm good at all times. Did I listen to music or make a playlist? Listen to music, yes. Not a particular one. At the time, I just kind of had this general playlist. I did try to make one for The Full House specifically, but I couldn't come up with any very specific songs that spoke to me that, yes, this was for the fic. Other than Against All Odds by Phil Collins, which Lex and I will still joke about. There was a spin-off story set where Molly and Sherlock are briefly broken up. Sherlock takes it very badly and ends up listening to Against All Odds on repeat for days. And since then, I can't hear that song without thinking of this fic. When I was doing Always Something, I usually had the episodes playing. I kind of had to when I was writing a chapter. I would pause it when I was writing a scene so I could quickly consult where things fit in. That was a really complicated story to do. Did you post each chapter as you finished it, or did you wait until you had several chapters and the entire story done? I posted as I went along. I do that all the time. Maybe sometimes I would have a chapter or two waiting, but it was never more than a few. That's something I've always done with my writing. I like to have the feedback of fans, just to know where I'm going to be going. I mean, usually I know where I'm going, but I at least like to have the encouragement. Like I said, fragile artists need to have all of the encouragement. So the first story I'm specifically going to talk about is the first one I ever wrote for the Sherlock fandom. It's also the one I'm most well known for. It's called The Full House. I started posting it on March 4th, 2012. I'd only seen Sherlock a few weeks earlier. I actually didn't watch the series until after the Reichenbach Fall had aired, but it immediately sparked me. So for a brief synopsis of the story, it's set immediately after Sherlock faked his death. Sherlock stayed with Molly in order to hide while he takes down Moriarty's network. Things get complicated from there as their relationship deepens and friends and foes come into play. This was a very early example of what I like to call Reichenbach roommates. It was certainly not the only fic that had Sherlock and Molly sharing space when Sherlock was faking his death, but it was one of the first, and not to toot my own horn, but I think it's one of the more well-known. Where did the story come from, / what inspired it, / where did you have this idea? It came from a deep frustration that at the time there weren't many Reichenbach roommate fics. I don't really know if there were any. It seemed to me that Molly helping out Sherlock was the, pardon the Potter reference, the Lilo at Lupin's of Series 2. That one line sparked so many Dog Star fics that I didn't understand why there wasn't the same amount of Sherlolly fics that were kind of based off the same concept. So I needed to make my own. Thankfully, it's now a very popular concept. Did you do an outline or any sort of brainstorming, or did you just start writing? Did you ignore the idea or not write it at first? So I think both. It's been a long time since I've written this story, but I do remember coming up with ideas long before I ever wrote them into the fic. And there was stuff that I just threw in as I kind of was writing. I do know I had no idea how the fic was going to end when I started it. There were certain things I knew. I knew Moriarty was still alive, and I knew I'd never reveal how either Sherlock or him faked their deaths. I also knew I wanted to reintroduce John into the fic by having him rescue Sherlock from falling off the roof in the second encounter with Moriarty. In terms of the idea itself, I absolutely wanted to write it. It had been a long time since I'd done any fan fiction. I'd taken a break to do some professional work, and I'd kind of burnt out hardcore on that. So coming back to fandom was nice and comfortable. It had been a long time since the fandom had really sparked me. How long did it take you to write it? Did the story change as you went through different things in life? The story took me about 4 months to write. Nothing happening in my life really changed the writing of the story, other than me being more in the Sherlock fandom and making more friends who would encourage me to do things. What was the hardest part of the story to write? That would be when Molly and Sherlock broke up. That was such a tightrope to walk. I actually remember there was one part that Lex told me I had to change, because if I didn't, it would look really bad for Molly to take him back. I can't remember what was originally there, but I needed to soften it. There was a lot of emotional negotiations going on. What was the easiest part of the story to write? I'd say around the time Molly and Sherlock moved into 221B, I'd finally gotten a handle on how to write the characters. It was also a familiar environment as opposed to Molly's house, so it was a little bit easier. Though I have to say now, having seen Molly's apartment and how fire it is, I'm kind of sorry they didn't stay there for longer. What is your favorite part of the story? I love when John comes into the story and he finds out about Molly and Sherlock's relationship, because he's just so weirded out by it. Sherlock's just super into being in a relationship, and I thought it had some of the snappiest dialogue. It was just so much fun to write. Were there any parts of the story that related directly to your life? As I got more into the Sherlock fandom, how I portrayed the characters got slightly tweaked. Probably the part where Molly is harassed online by Sherlock's fans came directly from the harassment that Sherlolly shippers got from shippers that probably I shouldn't name. Any part you want to rewrite or did rewrite after you published? Some of Sherlock's dialogue early in the fic I'd love to change. I was still getting a handle on who Sherlock was. I'd only seen the show a few weeks earlier, and I just didn't really understand him. And so when I go back to read it, some of the stuff he says rings false now. I'm not even talking about having seen series 3 and 4 and thinking that he's different. I just mean based on the first 2 series, the characterization didn't seem right. I did kind of get a handle on it eventually, but for the first maybe 5 or 6 chapters, it's kind of cringy. I'd also probably not have Mycroft be married. It never plays into the story at all, and it seems so strange now, as I usually portray him as in a relationship with Lestrade, or sometimes with Lady Smallwood, or with Lady Smallwood and Lestrade. But I just wanted Mycroft to be very traditional compared to Sherlock. The characters. Who was the easiest to write? That's Molly. I knew who Molly was, and I think out of all of the Sherlock characters I've written, Molly is the one who's changed the least in my mind. The hardest to write. Probably Sherlock, because I had to write so much of him, and he's a very difficult character to grasp. Especially since I'm putting him in a different situation than he usually is. I don't know. I actually don't remember thinking about it too much. Favorite to write. Sherlock. It's hard, but it's so worth it. He's the guy. It's his show. Of course I'm going to like writing him. OCs. I had characters that hadn't appeared in Sherlock at the time, but are canonical now. I suppose that counts. My version of Wiggins is very different from the one we eventually got, and I really liked my one. I also liked the one in canon, but I like the one in the story, who, by the way, was based on Eddie Redmayne. Like, his appearance was if Eddie Redmayne was a busker on the street. Of course, obviously, Mary Morstan. Uh, though, funnily enough, I did picture Amanda Abington being Mary Morstan, and look what happened. Though mine was different because mine obviously was not an assassin, but was a school teacher. So, just this close. I was so close to getting it. My Mrs. Holmes is also incredibly different from the version that we got on the show. Everyone in the fandom was so certain at the time that Sherlock's parents were divorced and that the Holmes parents really weren't very nice people. Everybody missed the mark on that. I also gave Molly a lot of brothers, and thinking back on that, that was a weird move. I don't know why I did that. I would not do that now. Probably, other than Mary, the biggest original character I had was my version of Moran. I certainly did it differently than a lot of other people did. And I know we kind of had Moran in the show, except not really. So Moran is the biggest, like, actual original character I had. I'm certainly familiar with More, and I did have Moriarty and Moran as lovers, but I had my own headcanon on who Moran was, which I think was very different than the tiger that turned up in More fics. For one, I pictured Mark Sheppard in the role. There's actually a reference to Supernatural in his first introduction as a nod to him being in the role. I also portrayed him as being less comfortable about being in a relationship with Moriarty. I know with More, that's kind of just who they are. They're just, flat out together. But I always thought that Moran would maybe be a bit conflicted about it. Who do you relate to the most? I relate to both Molly and Sherlock, which is probably the main reason why I like writing them as main characters. I just relate to them differently. Like, with Sherlock, I'm, the really oddball who doesn't really understand people. And with Molly, I'm the oddball who doesn't really understand people, just in, kind of different ways. Any characters you don't like writing, or were annoyed that you had to include? Nope, I only put in characters that I like. Were you shocked or disappointed by the response the story got? I was so amazingly shocked by how positive the response to this was. Still to this day, I can't believe how well the story was received. It seriously touches my heart. I still get messages. I feel strange sometimes because there are stories I've written that I think are better, but I'm glad people still love this one. Did you disagree with your readers' comments on characters, plot points, etc.? Not that I can think of. Did you learn anything about yourself as a writer during this story? This story reminded me how much I like writing. It had been a while since I sat down and just wrote something for the sake of, I want to write this, and I really haven't stopped doing it since. Any visual inspiration? I had the best visual inspiration for this fic. On March 22nd, after I'd been writing for a few weeks, I got a fanfiction.net PM from Lexi, and she said she'd drawn some fan art for me, and could I send it to her? We quickly became friends, and I would send her bits of my writing, and she would draw me pictures to go along with it. And it was such a beautiful collaborative process, and it gave me one of my best friends in the entire world. Those pictures can, of course, be seen on the AO3 version of the story, and I'm just so blessed to have gotten Lexi as a friend and gotten all of those pictures. I am wearing one of those pictures on my shirt right now. I'm the only person that has the shirt. I, feel so happy about that. I love Lexi's artwork, and I feel really glad that she has gotten so much exposure on the Sherlock fandom, and I feel just like this much responsible for her putting her stuff out there. So I love you, Lexi. So the second fic is Always Something. We actually just passed the 8th anniversary of this fic, as I started posting it on November 10th, 2012. It was also during the hiatus between series 2 and 3. This story is something between an AU and a missing scenes fic. I think it's what made it so unique. It's set during series 1 and 2. The basic premise is that Sherlock and Molly are married and have been since before the series started. The idea is that John just fails to notice, which is the titular always something, as in you always miss something. Where did the story come from? What inspired it? And where did you have the idea? It came from me being a contrary jerk. There were just so many people at the time who talked about how Sherlock and John were a couple when you couldn't see them, and I kind of felt like doing that for my own OTP. It was also kind of a writing exercise to see if I could do it successfully. I honestly think it stretched credulity, but I liked it a lot. Did you do an outline or any kind of brainstorming, or did you just start writing? Did you ignore the idea or not want to write it at first? The thing about this fic is that there's a ready-made outline. Each chapter covered another episode, so there was already a structure for me. That was not to say there wasn't a lot of planning put into this, because everything was so structured. I had to watch the episodes so many times and figure out where everything fit, and I had to do timeline stuff because Sherlock's timeline is pretty sporked. There was a lot of planning in this. A lot of planning. And when you're in a situation where you're trying to subvert canon, you've got to pick apart just absolutely everything. It's like, how can I make this work for me? And how can this thing that seems to contradict what I'm saying actually work for what I'm saying? I'm talking about the fact that, Molly has a boyfriend during series 1. So how does that work with Sherlock and Molly being married? And hopefully I found a reason that, people are okay with. How long did it take you to write? Did the story change as you went through different things in life? I started posting this story on November 10th, 2012, and I finished it on March 24th, 2013. The first 3 chapters were posted in November, and it was a pretty smooth ride. Afterwards, it was a chapter a month. It was a really hard fic to do, like I already said. Series 2 stuff was really difficult. What was the hardest part of the story to write? Oh, isn't that convenient? The Series 2 stuff. First of all, figuring out the timeline of Series 2 was a pain in the ass. It does not air in the correct order. Not that it wasn't written that way, it's just like Moffat and Gatiss thought they were being clever because they like doing that. I remember discussing it a lot with Lexi. We kind of figured out that Hounds of Baskerville happened during the case montage in Scandal in Belgravia. It was a logistical nightmare. And then emotionally, there was a lot of really hard stuff, particularly for Scandal. I didn't want to downplay Sherlock's feelings for Irene, but at the same time, he was married to Molly. So the entire dynamic was changed. It was difficult to write about Sherlock having what was basically an emotional affair with Irene and having him still be sympathetic. And it was really because of that I got really mad during Series 4 when John had an emotional affair with Eurus, and Moffat and Gatiss just kind of brushed it off as it was something unimportant. And I'd fretted over that with Sherlock for so long and tried to figure out what the line was that I had to walk for Sherlock to still come off like a good guy. And I don't feel like they put any of that thought into with John. It was just like, well, he didn't sleep with her, so it's fine. Do you know what? This video is not about my problems with Series 4. I'm just going to continue talking about the fic. What was the easiest part of the story to write? Sherlock and Molly getting back together after the whole Irene ordeal. Sherlock telling Molly he loved her gave me so much catharsis after having such a tough time writing them separated. Easiest thing in the world for me to do. I actually cried while I was writing it. I actually cried a lot during this chapter for many different reasons, but these were tears of happy. What is your favorite part of the story? It's the Schism in Belgravia chapter. It was the hardest to write, but it was totally worth it. I think I pushed myself as a fanfic writer in that chapter, and I'm still very impressed by it. Everything just worked really nicely. The characters slotted into place, and there was an emotional journey for Sherlock and Molly separately and as a couple. Were there any parts that related directly to your life? Not really. The story was pretty separate from me because it was so structured with the show. Any parts you want to rewrite or did rewrite after you published? I'm super happy with how this turned out. It's a very specifically structured fic, and I don't know if I could change it and have it be the same story. It's very of its moment. The characters. The easiest to write. Surprisingly, it's Sherlock, which I know contradicts what I said for the Full House, but I'd kind of gotten the handle on how to write him as a character. I'd written the Full House and a couple other fics, so I kind of knew him, and this story was Sherlock as we saw him on screen, just kind of the moments we didn't see. So I felt like I knew him a lot better. The hardest to write. It was so ridiculously hard to come up with reasons for John to be unaware that Sherlock and Molly were married. I mean, the concept itself is so ridiculous. I can't believe I pulled it off. Maybe I didn't pull it off. I don't know. I think there's really some points in the fic where it's like, really? Really? You're trying to tell us that Sherlock and Molly were married during this moment, even though this is what was going on? I'm specifically thinking of the stuff with Moriarty in The Final Problem. Not The Final Problem. The Great Game. Yeah, the Molly dating Moriarty. I can't believe I got away with that. Oh, jeez. That was a lot of tap dancing going on there. Favorite character to write? In terms of favorites, Sherlock and Molly. I mean, I'm just such a sucker for Sherlock and Molly. I mean, it's their story, so. Who do you relate to the most? For this story, I mean, it's both of them again. I mean, I probably shouldn't do this question because it's kind of the same as with the Full House. I won't do the OC question because obviously I didn't have any OCs because it was, it was the episode. Were you shocked or disappointed by the response the story got? That this and the Full House are considered classics in the Sherlolly fandom is honestly something that utterly amazes me and is not something I ever thought would happen. I am so forever grateful for the positive reactions I get from people. Did you disagree with your readers' comments on the characters, plot points, etc.? The most frequent comment I get on this fic is that I should write a sequel covering series 3 and 4, and I've said this many, many times before that that's never going to happen. This story is so specific to a post-Reichenbach pre-return era of fandom. The entire premise of the story would have to change to continue on for series 3 and 4, and I was never interested in doing that. So yeah, that's the only thing I ever disagreed with. Sorry, a sequel is never going to happen. I did try to do a sequel, a parallel story that was set in the Victorian era, the Abominable Bride thing, but it kind of didn't work, so I never got past the first chapter. Sorry, guys. I feel like if I were to try to continue it on, it would just be a shadow of what this is, and I want this to not be tarnished at all. Did you learn anything about yourself as a writer during this story? I learned that I can twist canon into anything I want, and I'm going to do that as much as I can. Any visual inspirations? So, for this fic, the lovely Senpaiko did drawings for several of the chapters. That's actually... Where is it? That's one of the pictures from it. I think that's from chapter 2 or 3, and I have a couple of others done by her. I've been so blessed to have such great fan artists as friends who like to draw pictures from my stories. So that's it for this self-interview. I hope you all liked it. I had a lot of fun doing this. I'll provide links in the description for both of these fics, although if you haven't read them and you watched this entire video, I'd be extremely shocked. So, thanks for watching. If you liked this, please subscribe to my channel, where I'll be posting more videos about BBC Sherlock, as well as Star Trek, Star Wars, Supernatural. I have done some fan fiction readings, including of Sherlolly stories, so please click the subscription button, and if you would like to support me, I have some places you can support me, which I'm not going to talk about in a video about fanfic. I can't wait to see other self-interviews from Sherlolly fans. And until next time, live long and may the force be with you. Thanks to these patrons for keeping the lights on around here. I very much appreciate all of the help from you guys. So if you want to keep watching more of my videos, click on my cartoon face over there and you can go directly to my channel and check things out.